back to the Unsolicited Film Reviews podcast. April Fool's Day is almost upon us, so we decided that we're going to do a podcast on the best twists in film. A very interesting category. We had a lot of fun researching this and doing a deep dive. So, as always, we're going to bring you 10 films that we think are the best exemplaries of this category. But first, we kind of have some depressing news in the world of film. Martin, you want to
Yeah,
address
yeah.
that?
So a couple of Oscar related news stories. The first one, as you say, is a little bit depressing. So just want to comment briefly on the attack and arrest of Hamdan Bilal in the occupied territory of the West Bank. Now, Bilal was one of the four filmmakers that won an Oscar this past year for the documentary No Other Land. And look, it's often hard to figure out what's really going on in the Middle East as a general rule, actually. I just don't believe anything that comes from Hamas, and I also don't believe anything that comes from the IDF. So, but in this case, there are enough independent reports from NGOs, including some Jewish organizations, that we can pretty much say with certainty that violent settlers attacked Bilal in his home, and when the IDF showed up, rather than stop it, they allowed it to continue and then arrested him. So this is obviously unacceptable on its face. But if he was targeted because he was part of a film that shed light on the discrimination faced by Palestinians in the West Bank, everyone involved in the film industry needs to be very concerned about this. And that's why it's disappointing that, and many people are upset at the Academy, because the Academy released a statement, a very mamby-pamby statement that didn't even mention Balal, didn't even mention No Other Land. So again, the situation in the Middle East, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, it's a very complex subject with lots enough blame to go around on all sides. Anyone who tries to tell you it's simple is being disingenuous. It's not. It's very complex. But in this specific case, filmmakers being violently attacked because of the subject of one of their films, that has to be condemned. So that's basically my comment on that.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, we denounce any kind of political violence that isn't completely necessary. I mean, at some point, self-defense is justified, but this was not an example of that whatsoever. This was just a modern day lynching, and luckily he's alive and
Yes.
he's gonna live to tell the tale.
And
But
he's
just
been
the fact,
released. Yeah, we
yes.
should mention that. Yeah.
So, but the fact that this is still able to occur was condemnable, and he should at least he lives to fight another day and hopefully have a long life and career. Most importantly, life, obviously. But
Yeah. But the Academy, as a representative of filmmakers, should really have taken a stronger stand on this.
yeah,
Uh,
absolutely. So switching gears,
yeah.
Conan is
On the
slated
bright
to,
side, yeah.
yeah, Conan O'Brien is slated to return as the Oscar host next year in 2026. If you listen to our Oscar recap podcast, you know that we both think he did a very good job. So I think this is a good move by the Academy.
Absolutely. Yeah. If they hit it and they do something right, might as well go back to the well. They've done that a few times and just keep him as host until he wears it as welcome. So hopefully, yeah, hopefully they can lock him in for a good, 3, 4, or 5 years, and he'll just be good every time.
And then lastly, before we dive into the subject matter of today's podcast, we're going to give you an update on March Madness. And long story short, I won
Yeah.
already.
Yeah. Yeah. The funny thing was, after day one, I had, on the percentage, I was in the 99.7th percentile of all brackets because I had every single one right except one. And it was the biggest upset of the day, the McNeese State one. So after day one, I was feeling great. I was flying high. And then, as of now, two of my final four teams are out of it already. So, yeah, so I can't possibly win.
Yeah, we're recording this the night of Thursday, March 27th, and as of right now, all four of my final four guys are still in there. So
Yeah,
drinks are on you next time.
absolutely. Yeah.
So what are we talking about today?
So we're going to talk about some of the greatest film twists in history, and we're really going to try to focus on the twists themselves. I mean, we'll talk a little bit about the films, but we really want to focus on the twists, and in particular, try to ask a couple of questions. One, obviously, what was the twist in the movie? So, big spoiler alert for everybody. Obviously, this is a list of older movies, so if you haven't seen any of these, you can try to skip ahead. But yeah, we're talking about twists, so there's going to be a lot of big spoilers for some of these movies. But most of them are at least 10 years old. Some of them, even up back to 1949. So hopefully people have seen these movies already, or have at least heard about what the twist is, and so they won't be totally shocked.
And we're starting to put time markers on our YouTube videos.
Yeah.
So if you haven't seen some of these, you can skip ahead and avoid spoilers because we won't be going back and spoiling stuff retroactively. So you can kind of skip through if you need to
Yeah, and
once
we
we.
should start doing that on Spotify too. We'll have to figure that out because the timing might not be exactly even on Spotify and YouTube, but we'll figure it out.
So I guess we should start with like what makes a good twist, and it's a very kind of overused word in Hollywood, and it's kind of vague in its definition. And sometimes when you know the twist, it tends to ruin the movie ahead of time before you even see it, especially with some of these older ones. But then again, a lot of movies get better on a rewatch if you already know the twist because you can see all the little plans and payoffs and where you were like, "Wow, how did I not see that coming?" and stuff like that. So it's a very interesting idea to delve down.
Exactly. And some of the filmmakers will actually have that in mind as they're making it. In one of the films we'll talk about in particular, I've read about a discussion that the filmmaker had where he said, okay, I want people to get this sense from it the first time they watch it and this from it the second time they watch it when they already know the twist. And so that's what good filmmakers do. I said we were going to try to answer a couple of questions, but I didn't get, I forgot to get, I got distracted, didn't get to my second one. First one, obviously, what is the twist? The second one, though, is more like, is the twist integral to the plot or is it somewhat incidental? And by incidental, that maybe that's not the right word because a lot of times the twists really add a lot more depth and to the plot and to the characters. But that's slightly different than it being an integral part of the plot itself. And I think we have movies that show examples of both of those. And that's not even necessarily to say that one is better than the other.
And then even there's also a counter argument to my first point, which is a lot of these movies also hinge on the fact that you don't know there's a twist going in, and knowing that there's a twist, not knowing what the twist is, but just knowing that there's a twist can kind of negate the twist.
That's true. Yeah. Yeah. All right. Should we get started?
Let's do it.
Okay, so the first movie we're going to talk about. Oh no, actually, before we get that, so we did the same thing as we did with our last list, whereas we each submitted lists, and then depending on how we ranked them, we came up with our 10 this time around. So two that we're not going to talk about, but that did get votes from one or the other of us, are Saw and Primal Fear. And I also want to shout out some OG sci-fi twist movies that starred Charlton Heston, and that would be Planet of the Apes and Soylent Green. We're not going to talk about those either. But the first movie we are going to talk about is the oldest movie on the list, and that's The Third Man. It's a 1949 film starring Orson Welles and Joseph Cotten. It won the 1951 Oscar for cinematography. So it's about a man called Holly Martins who travels to Vienna in the aftermath of World War II when it's a city controlled by Allied forces. He's there because he's down on his luck writer who's been promised a job by his old friend Harry Lime. But when he gets there, he finds out that Harry's been killed. And although he's told it's just an accident, he sets out to investigate because he doesn't quite believe it. That's the basic plot. So, what's the twist? Well, the twist, which comes about halfway through, maybe a little bit more than halfway through, is that Harry Lime is actually still alive. He's not dead at all. And not only that, but he faked his own death because he's basically trying to profit off of the chaotic situation in post-war Vienna, and he's working for the Soviets and making some money on the side. So that's the big twist. Is the twist integral to the plot? In this case, absolutely. It is the plot, basically. So yes, this is you could not have this movie without this twist. Um, and so that's the third man. What did you think of it and the twist, Zach? And I should mention that we covered this movie back a couple of years ago in our Century series when we were talking about movies from the 40s. So if anybody wants to find that, you can still go back and find that on Spotify. And there we talk a lot more about the movie itself.
Right. Yeah, we spend a good 15 minutes on each movie there.
Yeah,
And I love this film. Uh, as you said, you can go back to the Spotify archives and listen to an in-depth conversation about it. But luckily, I knew nothing about this film before I saw it for the first time, and this
same.
was about 10 years ago or so. And the marketing team back in 1949 was in a real tough spot here because Orson Welles was one of the biggest stars at the time, yet he is the twist.
Yes. Yeah.
So knowing that his character even shows up at any point is a huge reveal and it ruins the twist. But
Except
okay,
except if you knew that he was in it but didn't know that he was playing Harry Lime. And so maybe that's how
fair
they
enough.
marketed it in 1949. Maybe people
Maybe
just thought, "Oh, he's the third man." It turns out he is, but what we don't know is that the third man actually is is Harry Lime.
okay, yeah, okay, the fair point. But as a marketing team, are you going to keep your big star off the promo posters and ads?
Right.
It,
Which
it
they
would
did.
be it would be fantastic for the story if Orson Welles just shows up out of nowhere. Like you'd be blown away, and I'm sure it would have done fantastic through word of mouth. But it would be awful for the studio's bottom line.
Yeah, and he's on all the posters that you see. So obviously they had to promote him.
Yeah,
I mean, he was one of the biggest stars in the world at that point. So you could
100%.
they couldn't possibly have sold it otherwise.
And he's only on the screen for 10 minutes, but he makes that 10 minutes work for him. He's like
Oh,
that quintessential supporting actor type thing where he comes in just steals the show.
yeah, he's such a magnetic presence on screen.
So yeah, we know the cuckoo clock monologue. We like again, if you really want to listen to us talk in depth about this, that doesn't have anything to do with the twist, but cuckoo clock was not invented in Switzerland, so but it's still a great
It's
monologue.
still a good line. Yeah.
Yeah. So you want to just get to our next one?
Sure. So then the next movie we're going to talk about is The Empire Strikes Back. So I think this is a 1980 movie from George Lucas, second movie in the Star Wars saga. I don't really need to talk about this, go over the plot unless there's, people who haven't seen it, haven't heard about it, and have somehow avoided all conversation with other human beings for the last 45 years. Um,
But somehow get our podcast in their
but
bunker.
but yeah, exactly. Well, so good for you. Uh, anyway, it's obviously the second movie. The rebels are on the run from the Empire, led by Darth Vader, and obviously the big hero from the first movie is Luke Skywalker. So what is the big twist? Well, the big twist is Darth Vader tells Luke Skywalker that Obi-Wan lied in the first movie when he told him that Darth killed his father, and that in fact he is Luke's father. Oh, shocking. So, this one is kind of a unique twist because it's a twist on everything that we thought we knew from a previous movie. I mean, I guess it is a twist in the movie itself as well. Up until that point, we're still going on the assumption, or just the assumption that Darth killed Anakin
Anakin. Yeah.
Skywalker. But it's more of a sequel, so it's kind of unique in this list. Uh, is the twist integral to the plot? I would say in this case, not really. I mean, you could have had the movie without. It definitely is a case where it deepens the plot and deepens Luke's story and all the things with the cave and that whole scene and everything that Yoda puts him through in order to overcome uh, his background to become the Jedi that he needs to be. All that is incredibly improved by the twist in the story. But you could still have had this movie, I guess, without that twist. Um, And there's another little twist in the movie. Actually, it's in the next movie,
Mm,
which is surprised, Leia, you kissed your brother.
got some Lannister energy going on.
Yeah. Anyway, Empire Strikes Back.
Yeah, you make a really good point that it doesn't really make this particular movie, but it makes Return of the Jedi possible in that entire
That is true.
storyline.
Yeah.
So it makes the Skywalker saga a lot more neat than just the hero's journey of defeating an all evil guy that's just out to destroy.
Yeah.
It gives the character of Darth Vader a lot more depth than just this this absolutely Nazi satanic kind of all evil villain. And obviously, this is the most highly regarded Star Wars movie for a reason, and that's taking into account even the really good ones like Rogue One that came later. But yeah, I wasn't around for this twist, so I knew a long time in advance that Darth Vader was Luke's father, and even watching movies like Tommy Boy and stuff like that. I mean, it just reached such a high point in the cultural zeitgeist that it was impossible not to know this twist before you went in if you were not seeing this in theaters night one, I guess.
Yeah.
So I'd be interested to know somebody's opinion on how this affected them going in for the first time, but.
It must have been, it's obviously one of the most famous twists of all time. But again, as you say, everybody knows about this twist now. It must have been amazing to see this for the first time. I technically would have been alive, but I didn't, by the time I actually saw this movie and understood what I was watching, yeah, I already knew. So it must have just been amazing. Just such a mind fuck to see that for the first time. What? Darth
Yeah,
Vader is Luke's father?
especially since
That
like
must have been incredible.
this is like the advent of nerd culture. So with
Yeah.
how invested an entire generation was in this particular story, I can only imagine just how the gasps and like how the whole entire theater would just be stunned in disbelief. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Because
I'm sure.
obviously long before any such thing as internet or internet spoilers or anything like that. So literally nobody would have known this was coming. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, and only the dickheads that came out on night one that spoiled it for their
Yeah.
friends. And I know there had to be a few.
Oh yeah. There's a Simpsons gag about that, I think, actually.
So, are we moving on?
Yeah, let's move on.
All right, next up we have Get Out, which is a much more modern suspense horror, and it's by suspense master, probably the modern Hitchcock, Jordan Peele. It was basically his coming out party, and for my money, still the best of his three features so far. And that's probably because he had 10 years to work on the script. Or
Mhm.
not that he had 10 years, but he worked on it for 10 years. It's not like
All
he was
right.
just sitting back doing nothing. So I don't want to give him any flack whatsoever. It's a phenomenal script. So it's a 2017 psychological thriller written and directed by Peele, and the ensemble cast includes Daniel Kaluuya, Allison Williams, Lil Ray Howery, Lakeith Stanfield, and Catherine Keener, amongst others. It was nominated for 4 Oscars, with Peele winning for Best Original Screenplay. In the movie, Kaluuya is a black man dating a rich white girl. When he goes to visit her seemingly ultra liberal family on her estate, he encounters much more than just an awkward culture clash. So, what's the twist? Through hypnotism, the white family is able to take control of young black bodies and transfer their consciousness into them, essentially allowing them to attain a form of immortality. And while that sounds really complicated and convoluted, it's so well done in the script that it's very easily followable. But the twist is twofold, and the second one is a lot less telegraphed. The Allison Williams character plays kind of the innocent white girlfriend through most of the film, only for it to be revealed that she has lured dozens of black men to the family estate for some awkward racism and, way more egregiously, body snatching. What are your thoughts on Get Out?
It's an incredible film. It was at the time, as you say, it really kind of made Jordan Peele as a director. Before that, he was basically known for sketch comedies, amazing sketch comedy. Don't get me wrong, Key and Peele, fantastic.
Yep.
But this took his career in a whole new direction, and for good reason. It is a great movie. The twist is it's a little different because it doesn't really come out of nowhere, right? Like we know something is wrong the entire movie. It's just a question of what exactly is happening. And especially there's little hints along the way with like when we see Lakeith Stanfield and he's acting very weird. We had already seen him get kidnapped earlier in the movie, in the very first scene of the movie. So it is a little bit different in that it doesn't quite come out of nowhere, but it works so well because the twist fits so perfectly with the themes that the movie is exploring. It's not just a theme about latent racism, even amongst people who profess to be very liberal and progressive. It's also really about kind of white ownership of black culture and all this other kind of stuff, right? And so that twist really fits the theme, and so that's partly why it works so well.
Yeah, there are so many layers to this, so
Yeah.
many socioeconomic layers and race layers. Like it has so much to say without just overtly bashing you over the head with a message, which is just it's such an intricate story, such an intricate script, and you feel all those things you're supposed to feel without them just, without it being a message movie per se.
Yeah.
And yeah, the second twist of the Michelle Williams character really threw me off because I was expecting her to be like the co-hero,
Yeah.
but at the end it's like, nah, all these white people are out to get you. It winds up being his buddy Lil Ray Howery saving the day.
Yeah, and even though we already know what she's about because we've seen the box with the pictures with her with all these other black men, even though we already know that moment where she's frantically trying to find the keys and then her face just drops and she just pulls out the keys and she's like, I can't give these to you, right? That
Hmm.
like her transformation in that moment was so chilling.
And the one shot that really sticks out to me, and again, we're trying to keep a priority on the twist, but this plays into that one shot where Allison Williams is sitting there cross-legged on her bed, just like innocently sipping milk and eating cereal. It's in retrospect, it's so chilling.
Yeah, so sinister. Yeah.
All right, so next up we have Gone Girl. It's a 2014 thriller from master of the genre, David Fincher, from a novel by Gillian Flynn. It stars Ben Affleck and Rosamund Pike as a seemingly idyllic young married couple just starting their perfect life together. And as with most Fincher movies, however, things start to unravel pretty quickly. uh, Pike earned an Oscar nomination for Best Actress, and
Deservedly so.
yeah, and kind of surprisingly, this was to this day Fincher's highest grossing film with 370 million, but because I think it appeals to just about everybody who's going to see an adult movie. But anyway, so Pike's character goes missing one day, a victim of a pretty apparent murder. And if anyone's ever seen a single episode of Dateline or any other murder porn, true crime type thing, the victim's spouse is always the logical number one suspect. And she leans into that big time. There's been marital trouble. Affleck's having an affair with Emily Ratajkowski. Who could blame him? but, but all the signs of foul play are present. So, what's the twist? At the halfway point, it turns out that Pike is a bona fide sociopath who staged her own murder and framed Affleck. It's the perfect crime. She gets away, changes her entire identity, even to the point where she changes her accent, and she lives in a trailer park in the Ozarks. There are more layers, though, as with all Fincher movies. During Affleck's nationally televised interview with a kind of Nancy Grace type, Pike falls back in love, and putting that in air quotes, with her beleaguered husband. So she takes poor ex-boyfriend played by Neil Patrick Harris, fakes her own rape, brutally murders him, and turns up at her marital home covered in blood in front of hundreds of news cameras. Affleck is forced to take her back under pressure of public scrutiny and just not wanting to fuck with her anymore because she's obviously playing 4D chess on another level. And then even when he wants to break up with her again, she inseminates herself with one of his sperm samples. He's trapped and she's won. What are your thoughts on Gone Girl?
Gone Girl, it's one of these ones, as you say, the twist is right in the middle, and it's so good. It's interesting. I was kind of counting it up. By my count, I think there are five movies on our list that have narration or some sort of storytelling voiceover. And this is one of them. This is the first one on our list. And it works so well. And obviously, it's something that can be used to misdirect the audience.
For sure.
Very so is probably why it shows up in so many movies with twists. In this case, it's the perfect example, though, of an unreliable narrator because it's not just unreliable, it's deliberately misleading because the narration is coming from her diary, and her diary was deliberately planted to mislead the police and to change the story. So it just works so well on that level. And as you say, there's another kind of twist there nearing the end when she's watching Ben Affleck, his character Nick, his interview on TV, and she sees in his interview that, oh wait, maybe I can make this work with him. And then, as you say, she viciously kills Neil Patrick Harris's character, who you said poor him, and okay, yeah, nobody deserves to be killed like that. He's a pretty terrible character too,
Sure,
though.
sure. Fine.
Like there's a lot of terrible characters in this movie. Uh, but in terms of how the twists work, the movie is also so good at subtly pushing and pulling us against characters and for other characters. And it kind of swings back and forth. And it's so good at doing that very, very subtly that that's why all these twists really work.
Yeah, and one more note, it has a fantastic bookend from the first scene and the final scene because at first it's like, oh, these two newlyweds are so in love. What's in your mind? They're in bed together. Ben Affleck stroking her head, and at the end he's like, "What happens when I crack her skull open and see what's inside?" It's like, very parallel scenes, but obviously with completely different connotations at the end.
Exactly. All right, so the next movie we've got is The Usual Suspects. This is a 1995 movie starring Kevin Spacey. Yeah, I know. Gabriel Byrne, Benicio del Toro, and just a bunch of other stars. It won two Oscars for Spacey for Best Supporting Actor and Best Original Screenplay. So the basic plot is that it's in the aftermath of a big criminal massacre at a port, I think the LA port. And the one surviving petty criminal, who's played by Spacey, named Verbal Kint, he's being interrogated by a cop about what happened. And the cop really wants to pin it all on Burns' character, Dean Keaton. But as he's retelling the story of everything that led up to it, Verbal kind of tells him, lets on that the real mastermind behind the whole story was this mythical criminal boogeyman named Kaiser Soze. So, what's the twist? Well, Verbal as is this kind of loser, crippled con man. He's telling the story, but there's a time limit, and the cop only has up until a certain amount of time because Verbal's already made a deal with federal prosecutors, and he's gonna get out because he's already told his side of the story. This cop doesn't believe it, thinks that there's more. Again, he thinks it's about Dean Keaton. The time comes up, Verbal walks out, and as he walks out, the cop starts to look around and realize that everything that Verbal had been telling him was a lie, just as we get a sketch image of Kaiser Soze, and it turns out that Verbal was Kaiser Soze all the time.
Via
So
fax too, which is really
via
important
VS
because
Facts, yeah, 1995 movie this was.
that
Yeah.
would never happen today. But
No. And then also as he's walking away, we see him very slowly lose his limp. So even that was a put on, and the entire thing, everything about the stories. We don't even know how much of this movie that we've seen, how much to trust, because it's all from the point of view of this guy that we know is lying. So is the twist integral to the plot? Yes and no. I mean, it
No.
is because it's an explanation for everything that happened. But I guess you could have also just had a movie. It just wouldn't have been nearly as good or interesting. But you
Mm.
could have had a movie like this about these criminals getting together and doing this thing and getting caught. But it really is the explanation for the final for what happens at the end of it. So that's why I'd say yes and no.
Yeah, I'm not a huge fan of this film, to be quite honest. I think it's highly overrated, and it does kind of just fall onto one, the ensemble cast, but and then two, obviously the twist. But I just didn't find the plot very engaging until there were about 15 minutes left in the film. So what you just said, yeah, it would have been an okay bank rob or not robbery kind of heist film, but it just like none of the characters really engaged me. None of the performances really stood out until Spacey was really getting grilled towards the very end. And uh, yeah, funny aside, the I didn't see Usual Suspects, excuse me, Usual Suspects till about 5, 6 years ago, maybe. But
Okay. So,
the
so
ending,
you already knew the twist then, probably.
but I wouldn't have known if it weren't for the 1999 spoof film Scary Movie, because the end of that movie was the exact same as the end of Usual Suspects. So as soon as I saw like the crippled guy kind of doing his thing and kind of misleading the detectives and everything, I was like, oh, this is just like Scary Movie. But
No,
of course,
maybe that's why you think it's an overrated movie.
but even rewatching it, I just saw it tonight, and it just really wasn't that engaging. Like especially with you have a young Benicio, Gabriel Byrne, who we talked about in our St. Patty's Day special, obviously Spacey, and even oh God, I always forget the Chuck Palazzo, or the cop, the main cop.
What is his name? Anyway, yeah,
Yeah.
there's so many other like Giancarlo Esposito's in this,
Oh yeah, 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 yeah.
Kevin Pollak, Pete Postlethwaite is in this. There's so many people in this movie. Uh,
And there's also that
one of the Baldwins.
yeah, when I saw that Stephen Baldwin, I know they went in alphabetical order, but I saw that Stephen Baldwin was first on the call sheet. I was like, wow, that's a once in a lifetime opportunity for him in a movie as high profile as this.
Yeah. By the way, you're thinking of Chaz Palminteri.
Yes, that's the one.
Yeah.
And you kind of gave a wince and a shrug when you were talking about Spacey, but I'm actually glad that he's starting to come back into the good graces of the industry. And I guess don't want to get too deep into this, but despite his flaws, he was never charged or convicted with any crime. While he may be a creep, it'd be a shame if he got banished from the industry permanently, because he's one of the best actors we have.
He is a good actor, but I don't know. Yeah, obviously I'm not a judge and jury. There's enough stuff out there to make me think that I don't know, it's just so hard to prove that stuff. So I'm not entirely surprised he hasn't been convicted of anything, but I don't know. Anyway, we don't need to get into that too much.
Yeah, we can agree to disagree there, but he
Yeah.
is as we always say, we can separate the art from the artist, and I'm a fan of his work. Let's just say that. So then, oh yeah, it's halftime.
Woo, halftime.
Yeah,
Intermission.
time. So for your viewing pleasure, I have another round of unsolicited drink reviews. That is our highest viewed segment from when I made an Irish car bomb a couple weeks ago. So
Drink
let's do
break.
this. And what I'm going to be making is called an April Fool. But while I do this, Martin, any huge pranks that you've played or been a victim of in your lifetime that you'd like to illustrate?
Not, and I don't really have any huge pranks or anything like that. But there was one time in university when in first year in residence, And on April Fool's Day, a bunch of us the night before, we thought, oh, let's try to do something. And so it seems pretty lame in retrospect, but at the time we thought it was hilarious. It was one of these kind of college pranks. So what we did is we broke into the cafeteria and we took all the tables and chairs and we stacked them up into a massive pyramid that went up about 6 tables high. And so and then and then we left it like that in the middle of the night, walked by the next morning, and obviously in retrospect feel a little bit bad for the cafeteria staff because they didn't have time to fix it all. So everybody in the morning was trying to eat their breakfast all around this massive pyramid that we
Oh
had
my God.
stacked up in the cafeteria. So that's probably one of the bigger pranks that I was a part of.
And I imagine there was alcohol involved.
Oh, yes. Yeah, absolutely.
So the thing about this cocktail is you're gonna need a martini glass, 3 ounces of chilled sparkling water, a lemon twist, and that's it. That's why it's
What?
called an April Fool.
Oh, no. You fooled me. It's not a real cocktail.
But the funny thing about this is, you can buy this for your friends at most bars, and one of the biggest pranks that's been played on me is we used to do this in college a lot. I guess college is the place to do these kind of things, but they would fill a beer with water, and drinking water, it's fine if you know it's water, but if you go to drink a beer that's full of water, you immediately spit it out because you're like, what the fuck is this? Because your brain's just expecting a carbonated fermented beverage,
Yeah.
and like no harm no foul, so it's all good, but it's just one of the interesting things that you can do psychologically to somebody where they're expecting a martini or something and you drink it, it tastes like water. Oh, what the fuck is this?
I gotta
But
say
as
that
with
actually looks pretty refreshing though. Just sparkling water with a twist of lemon there. That that
Yes, it
that
is.
looks all right.
But like most of our movies, there's an extra twist.
Uh-oh.
I'm just gonna fucking drink this shit. I'm gonna pour a shot of vodka in there.
Ah, there we go. Twist it up.
Very good.
Straight up with
It's
a twist.
Yeah, it's a vodka soda with lemon now. So there you
Perfect.
go.
Perfect.
So next up we have American Psycho. It's a satirical thriller from the year 2000, directed by Mary Herron from a novel by Bret Easton Ellis. And it's as funny as it is thrilling. It stars Christian Bale as Patrick Bateman, a cynical, soulless misanthrope who is basically the embodiment of 80s yuppie consumerist culture. Also appearing are William Dafoe, Jared Leto, and Reese Witherspoon. So great cast, top to bottom here. Bateman has it all: the cushy investment banking job, the chiseled physique. He can do 1,000 sit-ups, and he goes out of his way to tell us that. He has the Upper East Side Manhattan apartment, the socialite girlfriend, the Armani suits, everything a red-blooded American male could ask for during the height of the Reagan era. But beneath that meticulously tailored exterior is a dark secret. He's a serial killer. But that's not the twist. So, what is? As it turns out, he may be more psychotic than any serial killer, if that's even possible, because these killings are all in his head. He's more fit for a psych ward than he is for a federal prison. So, thoughts on American Psycho, Martin?
I, I like that you said it's funny because rewatching it again, I hadn't seen it for a number of years. I had forgotten just how funny this is. Like it's obviously very dark humor, but it's hilarious just what it's all the inferences it's making and the way he hams up every scene. It's great. The whole thing is obviously a takedown of the crass immorality or amorality, I suppose, of corporate
Mm,
America. And so in that way, the final twist, I think is also an extra little dig at corporate America because it's basically saying, not only are they amoral assholes, but they're also kind of posers because
Mm.
they're not really the killers that they like to think they are, right? Like they always talk about, oh yeah, I'm a killer in the border, my whatever. And I think this is kind of also another final dig saying, well, yeah, they're not even really that. They're just posers.
Yeah, I always kind of knew that in the back of my head, but I was never able to articulate it the way that you just did. But yeah, that's 100% true. That yeah, they think they're the the great man, the kings of the world, the titans of industry. But at the end of the day, they're just cogs in the wheel that have to kind of big up their own reputation, and they're nowhere near as powerful as they think they are because they're just pieces of the puzzle.
Yeah, so in that way, I mean the twist I'm not sure is integral to the plot necessarily, but it really adds layers to
To
it,
the message, yeah,
to the message.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, 100%.
All right, next up we've got Memento. This is a 2000 Christopher Nolan film. It stars Guy Pearce, Carrie-Anne Moss, and Joe Pantoliano. And this was really the movie that put Nolan on the map as a filmmaker. It's about a man who has no ability to form new memories. So he has to write notes to himself about everything and even tattoo important information on his body. And the main plot is that he's trying to find the person who killed his wife so that he can take his revenge. And so, as a lot of Nolan movies are, it is not told in a linear fashion. It's told backwards. So we see how all the clues that he's gathered have come to be, how he's managed to collect all this information, and whether or not that information is actually credible. So, what's the twist? Well, the twist is that a lot of this information isn't credible, and that Leonard, the main character played by Guy Pearce, he's probably already killed the man that's responsible for killing his wife, or possibly even that she actually killed herself.
Mm.
And Teddy is a cop played by Joe, but a really dirty cop played by Joe Pantoliano. He's just been using him. And Teddy was the one actually that he kills at the very beginning of the movie. So chronologically, the end of the movie. But he was just using uh, Leonard's memory problems to get him to take out a drug dealer and make some extra cash. And at the end of the movie, we're left to believe that this cycle is probably just going to keep repeating itself. People are just going to keep using him because he can't distinguish what's right and what's wrong. So, is the twist integral to the plot? Yes, and no. Maybe it more is than it isn't. It definitely explains everything, but it also could have, I suppose, have happened in another way. It could have been there actually he could have found the person who killed his wife and it could have been somebody else. But this
Okay.
again just really adds so many more layers to it and it makes the whole way of telling the story and what it's saying about information that much more important to it. And so this again, a lot of these are about unreliable narrators. This is another one with a narration. It takes it to another degree because the main character literally cannot even trust himself. And that's the narration we're hearing. So another great twist movie. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, it's interesting. It could have been a straightforward, albeit original take on a revenge tale where he
Yeah.
does wind up killing the his wife's murderer at the end, and it still would have been a very interesting movie. But again, you're right that it does add that extra kind of Christopher Nolan layer that we all have come to know and love from him. Uh, you said it was told backward, but it's actually told half backward and half forward.
Yes. Yeah. You're right. Yeah.
So it's split
Scenes
up,
scenes are told in reverse order, but you see the whole scene in normal speed, in
right?
normal.
Because
Yeah.
the scenes in black and white are told from past to future, and the scenes in color are the opposite. So, and if you've ever seen the YouTube video of Nolan explaining this, he does it in kind of a horseshoe of storytelling, and then he'll put lines in the horseshoe. And I'm doing hand gestures, so I apologize to the listeners. So I'm trying to explain this as I do this. So yeah, it's done in a horseshoe, and you have the same endpoint at each point of the horseshoe where he kills the the drug dealer, which he thinks is the killer of his wife. And then Nolan goes into great detail about how he kind of layers it as the horseshoe kind of meets down in the middle as well. So it's I'd recommend checking that out if you haven't already. And yeah, this was not my introduction to Nolan. That I the first one I saw was Batman Begins.
Mm,
It's fine, you know. But in retrospect, you can see the trajectory of Nolan's career encapsulated in this film. The dude is obsessed with the concept of time,
yeah,
and he loves a nonlinear story, and he doesn't really put character over plot or plot over character. They're all kind of equally important to him, which is what makes him probably one of the greatest living filmmakers.
definitely. And I think in this movie, they this is one of the movies where they work most hand in hand, the character and the plot, because it really is all about what's going on in this guy's head. And again, how he's processing information and how you could possibly do that if you can't remember anything that you're doing.
Yeah, everything's so cerebral, but at the same time very accessible, which is such a feat for him.
Yeah.
Anyway, we'll probably do a Nolan retrospective at some point, so let's move on to. Oh, wait, it's another Nolan movie. Take it away, Martin.
Yeah, so the next one is The Prestige, which yeah, two in a row for Christopher Nolan. So this one bumped forward a little bit in time. It's a 2006 movie, and it's this movie is just filled with twists, which makes sense because it's about magicians who often involve twists in their tricks. So the basic plot is that two magicians have become bitter rivals after one accuses the other of causing the death of his wife, who is their assistant on stage because a trick went wrong. Anyway, as they go off each on their own to do their own acts, they each continually try to sabotage the career of the other, and oftentimes in very gruesome fashion by actually injuring and crippling the other person. And finally, when one of them comes up with a spectacular trick that's called the transported man, the other comes up with his own version. And then the rest of the movie is they each become obsessed with figuring out how the other person does it. So lots of twists and turns. But the two main twists are actually the secrets behind this same trick, the transported man. So, what are those twists? One is that Borden, who's played by Christian Bale, I should have mentioned, yeah, it's Hugh Jackman and Christian Bale play the two leads. Lots of other great actors in this. Michael Caine, who Christopher Nolan likes to use in a bunch of things, a bunch of other people. But Borden, who's played by Christian Bale, his the thing behind his trick is that he actually is a twin brother that he calls Fallon sometimes, but they've both been playing aspects of his life throughout his entire life. So he's only had the chance to live half a life. And that includes only sometimes being with his wife, sometimes being with the mistress. It's very, very confusing. The other big twist is that Angier, who's Hugh Jackman's character, has essentially been killing a duplicate of himself every single night that he's doing a performance by using a machine that he got from Nikola Tesla that makes a duplicate of something. So both very horrifying twists in their own way, and just incredible stuff. Because even the storytelling device in the movie is itself a trick or a twist, because again, this is another one with some narration or some voiceover, and in this case, it's people reading from the diaries of one or the other, and both of the diaries are actually meant to deceive the other. So once again,
Yeah,
there's
yeah.
also twists there. So is the twist integral to the plot? Yes, absolutely, because the plot turns on the obsessions of each of the magicians to figure out how the other is doing their trick. So yes, the twist is the reason for the plot.
Yeah, and there isn't like one major twist. It's just like, especially once you get into the third act, it's just like mind blown, mind blown. It's like just layer and layer and layer, and it's
And
just
each one
such.
getting more and more horrible.
Yeah, yeah. Like God, both of these guys are evil, evil people. And I guess you would even include the third guy, which is the twin. So all
Yeah.
three of these people are just horrific human beings that are willing to go to literally any length they can to just to be a successful I was about to say musician, magician. So
Yeah.
the one thing you said though that Hugh Jackman's character kills a duplicate of himself. He actually kills himself
Yes, you're
every
right. You're
time
right. You're right.
and then generates a duplicate, which is even more fucked up
Yeah. Yeah.
because you're taking it on faith that Tesla's machine is going to work every single time and that you'll be able to live. So yeah, the depths of depravity that these guys are going down to is just mind-boggling. And I haven't seen this in a few years, but I think it's might be Hugh Jackman's best performance. And like I don't want to get too deep into the film because we could talk about this for an entire podcast.
Yeah.
But yeah, his monologue towards the end where he's explaining his actions was incredible. Um, Always like David Bowie anytime he shows up in a movie.
Yes, he plays Nikola Tesla. Yeah. So obviously, yes, this is set about 100 years ago or so. Well, actually more by this
Mm,
point, 130, 140 years ago. Um, yeah, yeah, and it's not just that Angiers is killing himself, as you say, he's drowning himself. So
it's
it's,
a
one of the most
horrible way to die.
horrible
Yeah.
deaths you can think of too.
Yeah, if he was just shooting himself in the head, that'd be one thing. But
Yeah.
God, that just has to be such an agonizing way to die. But he's willing to do it just for a trick or
Yeah.
illusion, as,
Yeah.
Joe
There,
Bluth would call it in Arrested Development. But
yeah, this obsession about coming out on top and having the better transported man trick. It's a movie all about obsession, and
mhm,
the twists just really make the movie.
yep. So one of the most famous twists in movie history is Fight Club. It's our next film, and for people, mostly dudes. Let's be honest, probably 90% dudes of a certain age. This was kind of a rite of passage film. There were those who have seen Fight Club and those who hadn't, and you did not want to be in that latter category, at least when I was growing up. So it's a 1999 movie directed by now friend of the show, she's a Gone Girl, David Fincher, from a novel by Chuck. I can never pronounce his last name. Palachniuk.
Palandiuk, yeah, I never know how to pronounce it either. Yeah.
So it stars Ed Norton, Brad Pitt, and Helena Bonham Carter. And it sends up consumerism much like American Psycho did, but with a lot more cynicism than satire. I mean, there's funny parts of Fight Club, definitely, but it's a lot more cynical.
Yeah.
Norton plays the unnamed narrator who is fed up with his monotonous desk job. He's grown cynical to the point of being completely devoid of all human emotion. He's depressed, but not to the point where he's aggressive enough to be suicidal. The voiceover goes into ad nauseum detail about how pointless his life is, and I don't think you get away with the kind of voiceover that that movie does these days. Although, like you keep alluding to, a lot of these movies do have unreliable narrators, and that's another perfect example. So yeah, he's leading this pointless life, and that's until he meets Brad Pitt's enigmatic Tyler Durden. He's an anarchist in every sense of the word. He is the opposite of the narrator in every way. He dresses cool. He has the late '90s spiked bleach hair and got the six pack. Like this is peak Brad Pitt at his most Brad Pittness. And he lives on his own terms. He drinks, he fucks, and most importantly, he fights. Now, I know we're not supposed to talk about this, Martin,
First and
but
second rule.
but I think after 26 years, the cat's out of the bag. They start
Yes.
they start a fight club. So the fight club turns into an anarcho-terrorist cult, yada yada yada. The twist, of course, is the narrator and Tyler Durden are the same person with a split personality. Go.
I love this movie. So yeah, obviously I was the target audience given my age and when I saw it and all that kind of stuff. I will say when I first saw it, and I would have seen it in the theaters when it came out, and so I hadn't heard there. I had had no spoilers. I think I saw it coming a couple of minutes before it happened, the twist, but not much.
Hmm.
And so I'm pretty amazed actually rewatching it. I've rewatched it a couple of times since that I didn't see it coming and that more people didn't see it coming because there are so many tip-offs, but yet it's done so well that yeah, the vast majority of people I don't think saw this twist coming until it actually landed. Like the very first line of the movie is Edward Norton's narrator saying, "People are always asking me if I know Tyler Durden." And then the first moment we see Brad Pitt scare Tyler Durden on screen, it's when they're passing each other on escalators in the airport. And the line he's saying at that moment is, "Could you wake up a different person?" So, and there's just little things like that. So many clues all throughout the movie. But the twist still kind of I won't say it comes out of nowhere because obviously it doesn't, but it's just really well done, even with all the tips offs. But it's also one of these things at the beginning you talked about whether or not upon rewatch knowing the twist hurts or helps the rewatching experience. I don't think this hurts at all because
No.
I think you can still get so many things out of it by rewatching this movie, which is why I've rewatched it a few times. Yeah, how integral is the twist to the plot of this movie? It's pretty important because not only is the whole movie, as you said, about sort of anti-consumerism, it's also about identity. Like, who
Mm.
are we? He talks about this. A lot of the narration is, who am I if it's not the things that I own, the all the collection of things that I've bought, my whatever. Who am I? And so that is really the question at the heart of the movie. And so maybe the plot could have worked if it had just been two buddies starting the Fight Club, but not really. It wouldn't at all have been the same movie.
No, it wouldn't have been that memorable. And two pretty quick points. This may be the ultimate turn of the century movie, just because it deals with like global anxiety that surrounds the Y2K scare and like loss of masculinity and in turn toxic masculinity way before toxic masculinity was a buzzword.
Yeah.
So like the pendulum swings both ways in this movie, and all the characters are kind of dealing with that. Uh, there was way pre mass use of the internet, people still ordering off catalogs instead of Amazon. And just a really quick note, I watched this on Disney Plus. And if you would have told me 5 years ago that Fight Club would be would be streaming on Disney Plus, I'd ask you what you were on, and I'd ask you for some.
Absolutely. And one final part, since you're talking about the time when this came out, again, yeah, we shouldn't get too far into the weeds away from the twists. This came out in 1999. I still think that this might be the greatest movie of all, the greatest year for movies in entire history.
Maybe,
We
yeah,
maybe should do an entire pod on 1999 movies sometime. Anyway, little side note.
yeah, yeah. All right, so next up, Shutter Island. This is a 2010 thriller directed by all-time great Martin Scorsese and starring Leonardo DiCaprio. It marks their fourth collaboration out of their current seven at the time of this recording. Joining the cast are Mark Ruffalo, Ben Kingsley, Michelle Williams, and the late great Max von Sydow. It's from the novel, sorry for this butchering of her name, but Late Calligridis. I'm assuming it's Greek or some kind of Mediterranean. Anyway, I apologize. I know she's an avid listener, but this seems to be one of those love it or hate it movies when it comes to critical consensus, though it was a major box office hit. Did you have a?
You say this from the novel? Isn't it a Dennis Lehane novel though? Or is that the screenwriter maybe?
Yeah, it's a screenwriter.
Oh, sorry. I thought you were saying it was a novel. Because yeah, it comes from a Dennis Lehane novel, I believe. Anyway, continue on. Sorry. Didn't mean to interrupt you there.
Okay, yeah,
I can look it up.
yeah. No, you no, you were right. You were right.
Okay.
Okay, yeah, but okay, it was a major box office hit. It's about a pair of U.S. Marshals played by DiCaprio and Ruffalo who are sent to investigate a psychiatric facility on a remote island after a patient mysteriously goes missing. And you think that's a good enough plot, and it would be. But you know something's not quite right from the moment the marshals set foot on the island. It's a world of conspiracy, madness, half truths, and outright lies. I think a good alternate title would have been Gaslight, the movie. So twists and turns are all over this movie, but what's the real twist? DiCaprio's character is no U.S. Marshal. Well, okay, he used to be, but he's actually a patient at Shutter Island throughout the plot of this movie. And the entire plot is an elaborate attempt to break him out of his psychotic delusion and bring him back to the reality that he killed his wife after she drowned her three kids in a lake, which would be any enough to break any man. So no, not really much fault on his character, to be honest. And while not necessarily a brilliant film, this is the twist that absolutely blew my mind more than basically any other movie I've seen.
Interesting. Okay. For me, actually, I think this twist, well, it obviously deserves to be on this list because it's a great twist. This twist doesn't actually hit as hard for me
Hmm.
as a bunch of the other movies. And the reason why is because so much of the movie, so much of what we're seeing is in his head. And we already know that, right? Because he's seeing hallucinations. And at the time, we just think they're the hallucinations because of what's happening of things as they're walking around on this island long before we find out that he's a patient. So we're already conditioned, or at least I am watching, not necessarily to trust a lot of the stuff that I'm seeing on the screen. And so I think for me, that's why the twist doesn't hit as hard because I'm already not trusting things. And then it basically tells the audience, actually, yeah, you shouldn't trust anything that you've seen because this was all just a setup for this thing. So it's very good, obviously. And this is the one where I mentioned earlier that I had read something with the filmmakers where they talked about wanting to make sure that it plays really well the first time you watch it and subsequent times you watch it. And that was Martin Scorsese in this one. And it's true because you rewatch this, and it had been a while since I'd seen this movie, probably since it came out in 2010. But the things you do notice upon rewatching it is how everybody else around them, you can tell now that they are kind of in on this act and that
Yeah.
it's all set up to help him break out of his delusions. And you see that rewatching it, knowing the twist coming. And so in that case, I mean, Scorsese is obviously one of our most brilliant filmmakers of the last 50, 60 years. And this is just another example of it because he really brings that out of each one of the background actors, even as you're watching this again.
Yeah, and it's not Scorsese's usual fare because
No,
even like even if you go outside the gangster genre, everything's a rise and fall story. Even if you go back to Raging Bull, Wolf of Wall Street, like all of his films have been some kind of rise and fall. And this was just a total departure for him. And I think he did a very admirable job. Like it's not going to be held up as one of his greats, but like I said, just seeing it in theaters, I was still pretty impressionable at the time. I wasn't quite following film structure. I hadn't been in film school yet, so I was just along for the ride. And when it was revealed that DiCaprio's character was a patient the entire time, I was like, wow, that's pretty intense. And in retrospect, it's kind of overblown and like way too elaborate. Like nobody would ever actually do this in real
right,
life.
right.
But just being caught up in that film going experience was really fun.
Well, and just the tone and everything around the island is so creepy and so well done. You can't help but get sucked into it.
Yeah, and just one more thing. Is Mark Ruffalo a good actor?
I'm still never sure.
Yeah, I know,
Sometimes I
right?
think he is, sometimes I'm not sure.
Yeah, it seems like he's always just kind of playing either downplaying his actual personality or a little bit like here or there, but it's not like he's ever like, oh my God, I can't believe he's like he's a chameleon, like he's played like out of body. Like So yeah, the jury's
It's
still out
true.
on Mark Ruffalo for me, and that's especially true in a rewatch for this one because he always
Yeah.
finds roles that like fit him, but I
Yeah.
don't know if he's a good actor.
Yeah.
Eh,
I mean, he's obviously a good actor. Is he as good as his fame? Maybe not. He's definitely watchable though. Like
yeah,
he's watchable and everything. So obviously that's why he keeps getting roles because he's fine, totally fine to have on screen.
sure. So I had a bunch more notes on this one because I was just taking them as I was watching, but we don't have time to get into them. So maybe we'll
Yeah,
do a Scorsese retrospective at one point and add this to the list. But
possibly. Yeah. So yeah, so that's 10 movies. But wait, there's a twist.
what?
Yes. This
Holy
isn't
shit!
this isn't a top 10 list. This is a top 11 list.
Oh my God Almighty!
Just blew your mind. Blew your mind. So yeah, obviously no list of movie twists would be complete without M. Night Shyamalan. So of course, the final one we're going to talk about is The Sixth Sense. So this was 1999. There's that year again, a 1999 movie. And much like Nolan with Memento, this is really the movie that made M. Night Shyamalan a filmmaking star. It was nominated for 6 Oscars. So it's basically about, for anybody who doesn't know, it's about a child psychologist who takes on the case of a troubled kid whose case bears a striking resemblance to a previous case that he had, but that he got wrong because that ended up with the child being a bit grown up, coming back, breaking into his house and shooting him later on. Um, so this time, Malcolm Crowe, the character played by Bruce Willis, he's determined to get it right. So when the kid, partway through the movie, confesses to him that a lot of his trauma is because he sees dead people, at first Crow doesn't believe him, but then eventually he does, and sees the truth, and he helps the kid, whose name is Cole, by telling him that maybe he should listen to the dead people and try to help them and help the ghosts. And that seems to work. The kid finds a balance with the ghosts. He becomes a much more well adjusted kid, and job done. But what is the twist? In the very last scene of the movie, after seemingly everything is resolved, we find out both Crow, the character, and the audience realize that Bruce Willis's character was killed in that opening scene when he got shot, and he's just another ghost that Cole has been seeing and communicating with.
No way.
So, is the twist integral to the plot? Not really. I mean, I think you could have had the movie without it. It just wouldn't have been nearly as interesting of a movie, and it definitely wouldn't have been as famous because when
Hmm.
people think Sixth Sense, when people think movie twists, this is exactly what they think of. This is probably the first thing that springs to mind, which is why it's number one on our list. So it's pretty amazing actually rewatching it again that M. Night Shyamalan was able to keep the movie going the whole time, where Bruce Willis's character really doesn't interact with anybody except Cole,
Yeah,
and we don't really clock that the first time you watch the movie.
I know it
It,
seems
it
so obvious, but
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
you're right.
On
Yeah.
rewatch, it's so obvious, but the first time, I didn't get it, and so it's uh, quite the achievement actually that he managed to put this spectacular twist in at the end without giving it away and without making the movie almost boring and unwatchable to that point.
Yeah, and this goes back to the original point that I made on top of the show. If you didn't know that there was a twist, this would have been fucking mind blowing.
Hmm.
But I think word of mouth spread so much. I mean, this is I look back at the box office numbers, and it was only Titanic that had a consistent $20 million return over the course of like 7 weeks or more. So obviously it was word of mouth and people rewatching it, coming back to the theater because this is before streaming. So yeah, it was a really impressive cinematic achievement. Is it better on a rewatch? I don't think so
No, no, it isn't.
because it just becomes so obvious. And plus Shyamalan basically peaked then. And I know you compared this very vaguely to Nolan and Memento, but Nolan is built and built and built and built, while
You're right.
Shyamalan's kind of clinging to just being a twist guy. And so you go into a Shyamalan movie knowing that he's going to try to throw you, but if you already know that going in, then he's never going to be able to throw you.
Yeah, I only made that connection in so much as both Memento and this were the things that really made them as filmmakers. But
No, I
you're right.
understand.
Nolan took off from there and Shyamalan became it became stale because and I think in a way it's because the twist in this movie was so successful and was just such a huge thing that it became such an integral part of Shyamalan's brand that he felt
Hmm.
almost. I'd love to hear an interview with him because if somebody would ask him, honestly, a lot of your movies weren't very good after this, but nobody's going to ask him that. Is it because you felt forced into this role where you had to put twists in every one of your movies? I'd be interested to hear his honest answer to that honest question, but I doubt that question would ever get asked.
Well, yeah, well, the few interviews that he does do, he kind of comes off as a dick,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
he thinks he's way better than he actually is, and that's never a good look when you're a director. But I actually think a Shyamalan retrospective would be a good idea for a podcast, for good or ill, you know.
right.
So
Yeah, it'd be amusing for some of those movies.
yeah. And actually, I guess we have to shout out Haley Joel Osment's performance if we
We
never
do.
get back to this movie, because he really was revelatory. And I always thought, like I said, I've only seen this movie twice, once when it first came out, and once now. But Haley Joel Osment was just so good for a child actor back then,
He really was. Yeah.
and yeah, just so sophisticated and so believable. And Toni Collette was really good too.
Yes.
That
Yeah.
that scene
Younger Toni Collette. She was fantastic, actually.
that
She was sort of the emotional heart of this movie.
For sure, yeah. The scene that they had in the car between Osmont and her, where she finally believed that he could actually see ghosts, was really actually powerful. It I was moved,
Yeah.
and I didn't think I was going to be moved by seeing The Sixth Sense the second time. But all right, so those are 11 movies. One more than our typical 10 because we had to throw you for a twist. Next up, we have the unlikely rise of A24, the studio that kind of rose out of nowhere to become one of the most prestigious and profitable production and distribution companies in world cinema, and with still kind of an indie mentality. That's going to be fun.
That's going to be really fun. A24 has two movies coming out soon. One is this weekend, a movie called Death of a Unicorn, and another a few weeks from now, a new Alex Garland movie called Warfare. So we thought this would be a perfect time to dive into A24. And as you say, it's unlikely rise. It's going to be a lot of fun to look into this.
Yeah, I went to AMC a couple nights ago, and there was a very beautiful woman recruiting for the military under the guise of having the warfare poster behind her. So it
Oh
just
man, those
and
recruiters are such parasites.
yeah, and they know where to stick the needle. Like, oh well, of course I'm gonna go up and talk to this hot chick. Anyway, check us out on the website. Check us out on Spotify and YouTube, and we will see you next time on the Unsolicited Film Reviews podcast. Hope you enjoyed.
Bye, everyone.